Welcome to the Community Services Block Grant or CSBG listening session recording to provide an overview of the proposed changes to the CSBG annual reporting. My name is Melanie Durley, and I serve as a program evaluator as well as a data and evaluation specialist for regions 1, 2, and 5, and I will serve as your facilitator for today's session. I want to thank you for joining today to review the proposed changes to the CSBG annual report and learning how to provide written feedback on the proposed changes. We will now shift into the agenda of this presentation. We'll kick off the session with an overview, then a review of the proposed changes, a review of the implementation timeline, and finish with how to submit comments to the Federal Register. Before we dive in, I want to share some thoughts that will hopefully set the stage for meaningful comments. At the onset of this administration, in her very first meeting with the CSBG network, our director, Dr. Laniqua Howard, committed to taking a look at all the data we collect to ensure everything we collect has an intended use for the federal office. Over the last 3 years, OCS has attended more than 100 site visits, met directly with state, territory, and tribal administrators and local agencies in one-on-ones, small group meetings, and conferences, responded to annual report training and technical assistance requests, reviewed the feedback provided through the annual report quality assurance reviews, and we heard firsthand from many of you about the challenges you face when working to collect the information needed for the report. As part of the commitment made, we took all of your feedback and then examined all of what we collect, including the utility of each individual data point, both on its own and among a full list of data elements. We examined how each data point is and has been utilized, how often it's actually reported, where else it's reported, how we roll up the data and report it nationally, and then we compared the benefit of collecting each data point to the potential burden of collecting the data at the individual agency and grant recipient level. Based on this examination, we have proposed extensive revisions to streamline and clarify what the federal government is requesting, make the report easier to navigate and understand for contributors and reviewers, reduce burden on annual report contributors, and focus the federal data collection on the specific items OCS needs in order to effectively support the CSBG network, and increase the utility of the data collected to better demonstrate the impact of CSBG funding. It is ultimately our responsibility as a federal agency to think about the utility of the data we collect, as well as a burden to the grant recipients, subrecipients, individuals, and families gathering and reporting this data, and ensure that we are being thoughtful about what we ask of each of you. However, we also know what works well for one agency may not work exactly the same for another agency. Given how large the CSBG network is and each agency's unique needs and services, there may be some indicators we have proposed removing that may be useful for your state or local agency to collect. And while OCS has made the decision to remove it from the federal reporting requirements, this does not preclude grant recipients and subrecipients from continuing to collect, nor does it indicate the data point is not of value. We hope that as you hear about the high-level changes we are proposing, you will see your comments and feedback over the years reflected in these changes. I thank each and every one of you, not only for joining us today to share, but also for the work you do daily to serve millions of individuals and families across the country. I will now provide an overview of the proposed changes. As detailed in the Dear Colleague letter released on April 22nd, participants are expected to either have reviewed or have available the attachments from the DCL, as this presentation will solely provide an overview. We have taken an extensive look at the data collected, data submitted, where the data ends up, and how it's used across the life cycle of reporting, and propose some important and substantial changes. For ease of following the changes, we'll begin with the images of the different instruments within the Office of Management and Budget, OMB control number. Think of the control number as the umbrella and all these instruments under it. Under this number, OCS is proposing 4 instruments for collecting data, and on your screen, they appear left to right. The blue at the far left is the CSBG Annual Report 2.1, or Attachment D, when looking at the DCL. Next is the orange, which is the CSBG Annual Report 3.0, or Attachment A in the DCL. Then there is the magenta, which is the CSBG Annual Tribal Report, or Attachment E. And finally, on the far right is the green, which is the CSBG Tribal Short Form, or Attachment F. We'll spend the majority of the time today detailing the blue and the orange forms. The tribal annual report form and the tribal short form will be discussed at length during the tribal listening session recording. As shared, the updated structure of data collection was redesigned to thread what's collected. When we discuss telling the CSBG story, we want it to be one that's equitable and includes everyone, and that what we also ask considers the burden of collection and reporting in an equitable manner. So following the same coloring, the CSBG Annual Report 2.1 should look familiar, as this is what we currently collect and is required by 53 grant recipients. Annual Report 3.0 is the updated collection that will represent the ceiling of what we collect from grant recipients. OCS recognizes that these are significant changes in the Annual Report 3.0, and the network would require time to adapt and implement these changes. So we'll discuss the incremental approach to implementation later in this session. Then we have the CSBG Tribal Annual Report. This is based on the CSBG Annual Report 3.0 and is a modification of that ceiling. This is collected from direct funded CSBG tribes and tribal organizations that received $50,000 or more. And finally, the CSBG Tribal Short Form is a shortened version of the CSBG Tribal Annual Report for tribes receiving less than $50,000. Again, for this presentation, we're focusing primarily on the blue and orange forms. The first instrument is the CSBG Annual Report 2.1. We are operating with the incremental change to the report, and the OMB approval expires this summer. This is the report as we know it. This report laid the foundation for all of our proposed changes today and is organized with 4 modules. Module 1, State Administration. Module 2, Eligible Entity Expenditures. Module 3, Community Level Transformation. Module 4, Individual and Family Level. This report collects approximately 787 data points. Changes to this instrument include minor grammatical updates and the official switch to the Unique Entity Identifier, or UEI. It's important for us to share this instrument with you as it's part of the OMB approval package. We'll now shift to the changes in the Annual Report 3.0. These are the overarching changes made to the report to include changes with the unique identifiers, reporting cycle, domain updates, identification of concrete supports, and general improvements to structure and clarity. I'll now walk through each of these. On April 4th, 2022, the federal government ended the use of the DUNS number to uniquely identify entities and transition to the UEI. This transition allows the federal government to streamline the entity identification and validation process. It should be noted that this change is government-wide, and the process for issuing UEI is done through the General Services Administration via sam.gov. What this means for CSBG is really about the business intelligence tools we use to support the collection of data. All of the sub-grant recipients or eligible entities receive either a smart form or enter data into a state data system, which are then exported to XMLs to upload their data into the online data collection system, or OLDC, via grantsolutions.gov. The UEI is one data point that OLDC uses to ensure that each agency's data is uploaded to the appropriate entity. Last fall, OCS worked with all grant recipients with state data systems to implement this change in their business rules, and this was updated for the fiscal year 23 smart forms as well. What this means for data collection is that you will no longer see the phrase DUNS, but instead you will see UEI. And the grant recipients are expected to update the CSBG eligible entity list when there are changes ahead of the state plan season. The next report-wide change is the streamlining of the reporting cycle. One of the key areas of opportunity in better telling the CSBG story is aligning when the narratives are reported. There are a few states that report either on the calendar year or state fiscal year. OCS aims to shift the entire country to the federal fiscal year reporting solely for CSBG reports. So when we compile and aggregate the data, we're using the same point in time. This does not change how states manage their funds, but the periods that they report their services. This will show up in minor changes and reduction of information in subsequent elements of the report, where states and eligible entities are repeatedly asked to confirm the reporting year. The states here in blue are the states that currently report either on a state fiscal year, June through July, or a calendar year. We anticipate this to be a minor change as we reviewed federal funding that many of our states and local agencies receive, and many of those federal funds require reporting on a federal fiscal year. Throughout the report, OCS updated the domains by taking a look at the technical assistance requests, the use of the data, and the feedback through all the quality assurance reviews. A key change is the removal of services supporting multiple domains. You will find that some of those indicators have found new homes in other domains or were removed. There is now also a domain specific to transportation. Research shows that transportation is a key indicator of economic mobility, and many agencies at the state and local level indicated in the qualitative data submitted with the annual report the reliance on access to transportation across the nation for many of our most vulnerable communities. OCS now asks for information organized into 7 domains: employment, education and youth development, income and asset building, housing, health and nutrition, civic engagement and community involvement, and transportation. Our office wants to amplify these elements of the CSBG story. Concrete supports. Concrete supports are services that provide basic resources such as food, water, shelter, safety, healthcare, and mental health care to address needs. The current annual report captures concrete supports in the form of tangible goods and services to help people. The updates to the report now explicitly identify these supports. It's important to add that concrete supports don't have national performance indicators. Likewise, you will notice civic engagement and community involvement has no concrete support identified, as the services are more appropriately measured in the long-term outcomes. Throughout the entire report, OCS has made some improvements to structure and clarity and increased our use of plain language. It should be noted, as outlined in the DCL, the report itself will appear differently once in OLDC, and there are marked formatting changes that will be reflected in a clean copy of the 30-day notice. This includes report reorganization. Community level transformation has been Module 3, but now it will become Module 4 as it's recommended but not required. Based on the update to capture services rolling into outcomes, the individual and family, which is currently Module 4, but will be Module 3, now put services before targets and outcomes to help as we increase the narrative around services turning into longer-term performance with outcomes. Guided instructions. In instances where we may not have been explicit in who counts for a specific indicator or examples, we have worked to expound those. An update to guidance in the form of a CSBG Annual Report manual to reflect definitions and provide additional clarification on specific points. This aims to further define certain terms and phrases to provide more ease to our states and local agencies, and will be released as part of the implementation post-OMB approval. This manual would specify terms and what would count within a specific service. And finally, we have the updated column for service counts to be encompassing of units of measurement. In some cases, the count is number of individuals, or it's the number of concrete supports like a supply or meal given, or household served. As such, it will now read as number served. We'll now walk through the supplemental materials to aid in your review of the proposed changes. In the DCL, we have included additional materials to expound on some of the changes in the rationales. Attachment B, or the Service to Outcome Plan, shows a relationship between the services and outcomes. Some agencies provide services, but then may not make the connection to how they actually report outcomes. Under this revised Annual Report 3.0, we are shifting to showing the relationship between the services and the outcomes. This document shows the roll-up and identifies linkages and helps us shift to logic modeling so that when we tell the CSBG story, it's richly tied to not only how CSBG helps, but also how it transforms. On the right side is an example that shows the outcome. The number of individuals who obtain safe and affordable housing is linked to a combination of 2 services: the number of people who received rental payment assistance and the number of people who received housing payment assistance. There will be services and supports that naturally won't have outcomes. Next, we have the indicator disposition report. This details every indicator in the current annual report and what happened to it and why. When looking at the indicator disposition report, there are terms used, and we want to clearly identify those terms. Removed means we are proposing to delete the indicator in its entirety. Remain means what we are collecting remains as is, but may have minimal changes to the language. Repurpose means OCS will still gather the information in another capacity, but not in the annual report. It will show up in another function or activity of the federal office. So this may look like a question on the quarterly call or how we increase our engagement. Revise means there were significant modifications to an indicator. Merge indicates language from one or more indicators were combined. And added means we introduced a new data capture. Now that we've gone through the supplemental materials, I'll guide you through a high-level summary of changes. CSBG Annual Report, Attachment A in the DCL, represents the totality of changes and again is the new ceiling of what we will collect. It is still organized by 4 modules and has been reduced down to 17 sections and will be required by all 53 states and approximately 1,000 eligible entities. Put another way, we also want to highlight the burden reduction on what's collected. In the state administration module, we decreased that by 30 data points, which is a 36% reduction. Eligible entity expenditures was decreased by 35 data points, which is a 27% reduction. And for individual and families, we decreased it by 161 data points, which is a 43% reduction. Now we'll do a review by module. For the first module, state administration, we know who's required to submit this data, and here we have all the sections currently in this module. Section A, lead agency authorized official and point of contact. Section B, statewide goals and accomplishments. Section C, CSBG eligible entity update. Section D, organizational standards for CSBG eligible entities. Section E, state use of funds. Section F, state training and technical assistance. Section G, state linkages and communication. Section H, monitoring, corrective action, and fiscal controls. And Section I, results-oriented management and accountability system. Here we have a listing of the dispositions for state administration. It should be noted that the reduction we calculated is based on the total of removed and merged, since in some cases, 2 indicators turned into 1. We'll now give a summary of each disposition category. 9 were removed, 32 remain, 14 were repurposed, 17 revised, 11 merged, and none were added. Section A saw the removal of information that the federal government can collect through other means when necessary for any national reporting. The goal here was to be a bit more concise and consider the burden on state administrators. So for Section A, lead agency authorized official point of contact, 1 indicator was removed. For Section E, state use of funds, 4 indicators were removed. And for Section G, state leakages and communication, 4 indicators were removed. Some examples of indicators that removed were state linkages and communication at the local level, as well as state assurance of CSBG eligible entity linkages to fill service gaps. Remaining indicators, core information required for the grant administrators remains. So here you'll see 6 sections. Section A, go back. Section A, lead agency authorized official point of contact. 12 indicators remain. CSBG eligible entity update, 1 indicator remains. State use of funds, 10 indicators remain. State linkages and communication, 1 indicator remains. Monitoring corrective action and fiscal controls, 5 remain. And results-oriented management and accountability system, 3 remain. There were some elements in the state administration module that were repurposed to enhance how the federal government provides support to states as grant recipients. This information is incredibly vital, and OCS may still inquire, but will be institutionalized through other functions of the federal office. We examined how we can gather the information while considering the burden for state agencies. Examples of indicators that are repurposed include CSBG eligible entity overall satisfaction targets, as well as assessment of organizational standards. And you see on this slide, for statewide goals and accomplishments, 6 were repurposed, and for organizational standards, 8 were repurposed. Revisions for eligible entities include more flexibility for the state to indicate changes to local agencies midstream. This wouldn't change the requirement to update the CSBG eligible entity list before initializing a new state plan, but if another agency is added or changed, you could add it to the annual report. For state use of funds, some of the information has been reduced to shift the burden from the state and also restructured in different elements of the report. Elements within state linkages and communication, as well as monitoring, were updated to be a bit clearer in where it presents in the report. And then finally, the section on performance measurement was renamed to be inclusive of ROMA and other models of performance measurement to align within the statute. On the slide, you will see what's revised. Section C, 1 was revised. Section E, 11 were revised. Section G, 1 was revised. Section H, 3 indicators were revised, and Section I, 4 were revised. We reviewed the state administration module to figure out where we could be more concise, and also reviewed what gets submitted to determine if there were better ways to actually present the question, so the responses were more poignant and carried the appropriate utility. We streamlined opportunities for agencies to expound on a quality improvement plan or technical assistance plan. We worked also to be more explicit with the terms in the state use of funds. On the slide, you will see for Section E, 1 indicator was merged. For Section F, 2 were merged. Section G, 2 were merged. And Section H, 6 were merged. Our next module, Eligible Entity Expenditures, Capacity, and Resources, completed by CSBG eligible entities through a smart form, has 3 sections. Section A, CSBG Expenditures by CSBG eligible entity. Section B, CSBG eligible entity capacity building. Section C, allocated resources per CSBG eligible entity. Here we have a listing of the dispositions for eligible entity expenditures. It should be noted again that the reduction we calculated is based on the total of removed and merged, since in some cases, 2 indicators turned into 1. I'll now give a summary of each disposition category. 38 were removed, 87 remain, none were repurposed, 5 were revised, 0 were merged, and 1 was added. A greater portion of this module was eliminated by virtue of the report streamlining. So in places where local agencies would need to repeatedly share the reporting year, that has been eliminated. There is also duplication of information for the purpose of what the federal office absolutely needs to report, so these have been adjusted. There are also elements in this module that are underutilized writ large. A few examples of indicators that were removed include staff certifications, as well as hours of agency staff and capacity building activities. On the slide, you will see for Section A, 8 indicators were removed. Section B, 22 were removed, and Section C, 8 were removed. Core information required for grant administrators remains. As you'll see on the slide, Section A, 8 remain, Section B, 14 remain, and then Section C, 65 remain. There were minor revisions that align with the report-wide changes and the updated domain name changes, as well as revisions to help with clarity and accuracy. So agencies can now add if they have expenditures to support transportation initiatives. You'll see on the slide for Section A, 4 were revised, and for Section C, 1 was revised. With the addition of transportation as a domain, a line was added to include that element, which is the one you see on the screen. 1 indicator was added to this section. Our next module, community level transformation, is the recommended portion of the report and is the module that saw no content changes, but rather structural. This is organized by 3 sections. Section A, Community Initiative Status Form. Section B, Community National Performance Measures. And then Section C, Community Strategies List. And again, there were no changes to this module. Individual and family level represents our largest component of the annual report by count of indicators and where you'll see the bulk of changes. This is organized by 3 sections. Section A, Individual and Family Performance Indicators. Section B, Individual and Family Services. Section C, the All Characteristics Report. Structurally, the sections of the individual and family are shifted to follow the service to outcomes. Currently, the FMPIs are first in this module with the services after. Those have been switched since services are provided that ultimately lead to outcomes. As I walk through the individual and family level changes, I'd recommend pulling up the corrected version of the CSBG Annual Report 3.0, as there are over 100 individual indicators removed, 68 revised, 69 merged, and 14 added. This represents a great deal of our data for reporting, and it also represents the greater part of what we collect. And we want to examine the burden placed not only on our local agencies, but also on the individuals and families that come in seeking services and may be burdened to furnish a lot of this information. There were significant reductions in what's collected to reduce that burden and collect more concise information. Section A, with the calibration of the domains and updates to how these are measured long-term, there were services that were removed, like the number of people that received a birth certificate or driver's license. While we maintain that this is important information, the burden to collect it when the numbers are low across the network led to its elimination. Section B, we remove data points that are underutilized across the network or are more difficult to measure in instances where encounters may be sporadic. For example, some FMPIs likely would require a pre or post test to determine if there was an improvement, or may lead to what's known as a recall bias, where whether someone improved their social network. We also examined the types of technical assistance and reporting errors for certain points of data and removed areas that created more burden, like capturing individuals that achieve more than one outcome. A few examples of indicators that were removed in this section include the number of employed participants who increased benefits related to employment and the number of people who increased their net worth. Section C, the All Characteristics Report, saw the removal of information that isn't germane to national reporting at this time and is underutilized at large by those reporting. Examples of indicators that were removed in this section include other resources of income and non-cash benefits. And you'll see on the screen in Section A, 46 indicators were removed, Section B, 26 removed, and Section C, 42 were removed. Many of the indicators in an individual and family remained in the report, as these share the details of how local agencies are providing services. And you'll see on the screen in Section A, 16 remain, Section B, 16 remain, and then in Section C, 90 remain. The revisions here also tie back to the services to outcomes. What we are aiming to demonstrate is how the services provided turn into longer-term outcomes. So you'll notice minor revisions to help make the case of how a service can support results. For example, the number of people receiving immunizations, health screenings, or development delay screenings are now cascaded up into the number of people who improved their health and well-being through preventative measures. In the nominal data collected in the All Characteristics Report, we adjusted language to be more inclusive, meet directives, and align with government-wide reporting to make it more simplistic when aggregating data. For example, the age categories were updated with the census. And in the final version of the annual report, there will be an update to the race and the ethnicity categories to align with directives from the White House Office of Management and Budget on capturing race and ethnicity, as many of our grant recipients are seeing with other federal agencies, federal programs like LIHEAP. There were mergers in Module 4 to create more inclusive data points. For example, in the current annual report, there is one indicator for child care payments and one for child care subsidies. There are instances where one state may report no subsidies but report payments. But the outcome of that is the family now has access to affordable childcare that may provide space for employment opportunities, to attend medical appointments, to go back to school, or serve on a board. The outcomes of this service are the same: access. So indicators like this were merged. Another example of this is the provision of services like the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance, or VITA. These were merged into the financial management programs. And you'll see on the screen 69 indicators were merged. There were 14 indicators added here, and some include water safety in homes, adding in transportation services like gas cards, medical transportation, and non-medical transportation. During the site visits, OCS learned how local agencies uniquely meet needs by starting bus routes to get people to medical appointments in between agency sites, to appointments at the Social Security office, or to get access to benefits. Those are vital bits of information that help round out how agencies are meeting needs to address the causes and conditions of poverty. Additionally, FMPIs were added to capture health outcomes as the number of individuals with access to health coverage, the numbers of individuals receiving wellness services, and the number of individuals receiving access to healthy food options as a few examples. This wraps up the summary of changes, and we want to now walk through the implementation, as this will be critical when we discuss the changes and how they take shape. And on the screen, you will see the individuals that were added. Section A, 8 were added, Section B, 6. As outlined in the DCL, the changes are significant that it may take 2 fiscal years to be implemented. On your screen, you will see a timeline. The fiscal years in blue, magenta, and orange represent the reporting year and not when it's due. So for fiscal year 2024, which would be due on March 31st, 2025, states and territories would collect the annual report, as you all know now, the CSBG Annual Report 2.1. During that time, OCS will be preparing for the change through building out the systems to support the new collection, developing enhanced training and technical assistance and materials to support the network. This would also include preparing to support those states who use external systems to prepare for the change. Then for fiscal year 25 CSBG Annual Report, which is due on March 31st, 2026, states and territories would be required to choose either 2.1 or 3.0 for this report. You may decide to move full swing ahead with the change, or determine you require more time to prepare your state and network for the changes. OCS would be positioned to support both schemas. And then finally, for fiscal year 26, the CSBG Annual Report, which would be due on March 31st, 2027, states and territories would be required to shift to using the Annual Report 3.0. We will now shift into how you can provide written comments. Members of the public may submit comments within 60 days of the posting of the Federal Register notice. To do so, review the questions at the bottom of the notice and email your comments to infocollection@acf.hhs.gov by June 21st, 2024. And you'll see the links on here to help you in your review and provide comments. Please note that the department and ACF will provide consideration to comments and suggestions submitted by the 60-day comment period directly again to infocollection@acf.hhs.gov. So all comments submitted by June 21st, 2024. Following that time, HHS and ACF will respond to comments through OMB, and a final 30-day notice will be issued with changes pending OMB approval. Please share any comments you have about the proposed collection of information if it's necessary for the proper performance measurement of federal, state, or local agencies, whether the information to be collected produces a significant burden, and if so, how the burden could be minimized on respondents, what, if any, additions, revisions, or modifications of the information collection would you suggest, the quality of the information to be collected, the clarity of the information to be collected, the accuracy of the agency's estimate of burden on the proposed collection of information. And note that all the questions are optional. You don't have to respond to each question. It may be helpful to have the DCL and attachment open while you consider comments. This concludes our overview of proposed changes to the CSBG annual reporting. We hope that you today saw your feedback reflected in these changes, see an emphasis on the utility of each individual data point, both on its own and among the full list of data elements. As shared earlier, we were thoughtful in how we examined each data point, its use and how often it's actually reported, where else it's reported, and how it rolls up nationally, and then compared that the benefit of collecting each data point to the potential burden of collecting the data points at the individual agency and grant recipient level. As shared earlier, the removal of the requirement does not preclude the data from being collected, and we encourage you all to tailor your collection for the needs of your local networks. This exercise was about reducing the burden of federal government requirements and us comporting with the Paperwork Reduction Act. We encourage you to submit any comments after today's session through the formal FRN process as outlined a short time ago. On behalf of the Office of Community Services, Division of Community Assistance, the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, and Mathematica, I thank you for listening today, and we thank you for your feedback and your partnership.